Forget your keys. Forget your phone when it's in your hand. Forget why you walked into this room. Listen, who hasn't been there? We all worry a little bit about keeping cognitively sharp until the end, and dementia, Alzheimer's. And listen, those things are at an all time high. We're going to explore in this episode the stress of the pandemic, the stress of restrictions and isolation, and our general behavior changes in the last nearly 2 years as we do this live, and how it's affected our brain health. You're going to love this episode. I'm Deborah Atkinson. You're listening to Flipping 50, where I address your top struggles and your concerns and share what to eat, how to move, and how to change your mindset so that you can have the energy and the vitality that you want, need, and deserve in this second and better half. And my real goal is to give you some things to think about and ponder, but also tangible actions and steps, things that you can do right now to improve your life today and for the future. And I think you're going to really love this episode, and want to let you know the sponsor for today's episode is going to introduce you, if you need an introduction or a restart, to one of the things we talk about. So you didn't think you were going to go through something about brain health or an entire episode without hearing about the benefit of exercise. So if you haven't gotten started or need a restart, the 5-day flip is perfect for you. 5 days of short videos that complement each other and that do boost your energy, not drain it, so that you can convince yourself that, yes, I do have time. And yes, exercise can actually make me feel better, not exhausted. I'll put the link in the show notes. So for now, let's dive in and all about brains. My guest, Teri Jacqueline, is a licensed naturopathic doctor and certified functional medicine practitioner in private practice for over 20 years. Prior to becoming an ND, she spent 10 or more years in the frantic world of corporate public relations, where she learned firsthand that 70 career hours per week what they can do to you and your health. And on top of that, she's lived for the last 36 years with her own diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. Now, Teri's committed to bringing the new brain science together with natural medicine and unprecedented support to change the way her patients experience MS and live amazing life beyond the diagnosis. Teri is an enthusiastic student of the healing power of nature and a person's ability to access their own health potential, and shares this regularly in her lectures and public speaking. Over the last 2 years, Teri has moved her practice online. Go figure. And develop a unique program called Transform MS to help people with MS stop their symptoms and feel in control again. Teri, thanks so much for joining me.
Well, it's so great to be here, Deborah.
And we're going to dive in, and I want to make sure everybody listening. So we've got a great listenership. If you don't have MS, stick around, because we're not stopping there. But if you know someone, and most of us do, so this is also a great resource to stick in your back pocket and make sure you remember this podcast to share with others. So, by the way, if you have a brain, you should listen. There you go.
That's right. That's exactly what I say too. You got a brain, this all applies to you.
Well, and I know some of my listeners, I do know, and I can say this because I'm one of you, that some days we wonder, do we? Like, where'd it go?
Yeah.
Which is a concern, which is why this topic, I think, is so great. And I think you brought this up that, in the last couple of years, we've gone through quarantine, we've gone through isolation, we've gone through a ton of stress. And it's some of it related to being in quarantine and isolated from our loved ones struggling with these kinds of issues in an amplified way. I know that's been true for me. So I want to get to that as we, talk about real times, real now. But let's just unpack first with some key things we need to know about our brains.
Okay. So the first thing, and the thing that, first of all, I'm totally excited about the new brain science. And I think everybody here has reason to be as excited as I am, because being sort of in the 50 plus crowd, we understand or remember back in high school when you used to joke about how many brain cells did you kill this weekend, you know? And because the dominant thought of the day was that the brain had a finite number of brain cells and no capacity to regenerate. Well, in the last 5 or 10 years, it's really hit the mainstream that that's just not true anymore. So the big thing that I want people to remember is it doesn't matter where you are with your brain health, the brain has an amazing capacity to rejuvenate. So
We have to love
there's
that.
hope for all of us, you know.
Okay, so talk to me a little bit.
Oh,
What kinds of things can we do to nurture that rejuvenation?
okay. So there's, I mean, I think the big things that I've seen since all the lockdowns and restrictions we've all experienced, and the sort of decline of people's good health is a real change in normal behaviors. And in even some of my super healthy go-getter, cheerleader patients are like, yeah, no, I couldn't get off the sofa this weekend. And, oh
Hmm.
yeah, I'm not eating what I should be eating. And, oh, by the way, exercise, forget it. So at the top of the stack, for sure, is managing blood sugar or insulin resistance. And I know that's something you talk about a lot, Deborah. And, but it impacts everything from sleep to inflammatory damage in the brain. And like some key notes about this are that Alzheimer's is actually referred to as type 3 diabetes now. So think about that connection between blood sugar and the brain, right? Midlife obesity is it puts people at high risk for any kind of neurodegenerative situation. So we've got a lot of good reasons to manage that blood sugar or insulin resistance. Another one is lack of activity. I mean, I know before
Bite
the,
your tongue.
oh, no kidding, right? before I'm totally guilty of this one. And before the pandemic, I was working out in 2 different gyms 4 to 6 times a week. And guess what? They both closed down.
Mm.
So, and I'm pretty committed to my fitness level. So if I'm being lazy, I can imagine what other people are doing too. But what does exercise do? I call exercise the most important supplement for the brain, by the way. When people say to me, "Oh, what's the best supplement I can take for my brain?" I say exercise. What are we doing with exercise? We're pumping circulation. So blood, lymphatics, like clearing garbage out of the brain with the lymphatic system. We are building the mitochondria. I mean, the best way to build more mitochondria, which are, by the way, the energy centers of every cell, is movement and exercise. And of course, neuroplasticity, or the brain's capacity to change, is driven by movement as well.
I love that. And don't you think that I am not going to be putting that in a meme, because I'm all over that one. Exercise is the most important supplement for your brain, said Teri
Absolutely.
Jacqueline today. You heard it
Absolutely.
here first.
You quote me on that one.
I totally will. Okay, so let me ask you this. This just brings something to my mind. And I think of this and I want to know, is this related to kind of
Mhm.
what you're talking about? Or is it just kind of a side path? But I've noticed this frequently that, I work best to, like, I work a couple hours in the morning and then I take an exercise break. And often that's when I generate ideas. I'll come back from a walk or a run or a swim and need to jot things down right now, like ideas that,
Absolutely.
okay.
Absolutely. And in fact, before we sat down, I've been working on my new program, like, you know, what that's like. So we were doing that all afternoon. And I said, I'm on with Deborah in half an hour. I need to go outside and clear my mind, right? What is
Mhm.
clear my mind? That's exactly what you do. You regain focus. And, you know, on that note, that it's more than just that, Deborah. It's mood, it's cognition, it's all of that stuff, and those areas are really also been impacted by the last 2 years, right? Of
Mhm.
people not moving.
So talk about that a little bit. So some statistics I've shared with our audience, and
Mm-hmm.
it's been an interesting thing to poll people. And there's always a question about who was polled, how were they polled, did we get a good sample of people?
Mm-hmm.
But putting that aside, there are those questions. It seemed that there were a number of people who were not as active,
Mm-hmm.
who became more active, maybe because they didn't have a commute, maybe because they had a little less stress or obligations that kept them, if time was a restraint for them or a constraint in their
Right.
exercise. And then there were those people who were like the regular gym rats and gym goers, like the
Mm-hmm.
religious ones there before the people are open to there to open the gym. you know they backed off. They didn't exercise as much because they kind of didn't have their church, I think was the deal.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to see, did this all come out in the wash? I mean, or overall, have we suffered? Are there studies that are coming out about what's happened to our brain health?
Absolutely. And especially, so I'm just thinking of your gym rat analogy, and I'm definitely one of those. But sorry, my mind is just going off on a little rampage here now, thinking about what is that? That's the, like you said, the church. Well, that's the community, right?
Yeah.
And community and connection is so important for brain health, right? The nervous system is wired for connection. And there are studies coming out that showing us, you know, increased levels of anxiety, social anxiety, depression, um, just people just overwhelmed and not being able to function. So there's definitely a connection there.
Yeah, love that. The other
Mhm.
thing I noticed was this was early on in the pandemic, maybe even as early as late April, early
Mhm.
May last year. The biggest, I think, I hate to say the complaint because I think it was certainly valid. We all had it, but the problem for most people was there was no anchor. Like
Yeah,
if people who did have a commute had to be, butt in the seat in an office at some point, usually
absolutely.
it
Yeah.
was gone, and showing up to their regular exercise class at a certain time, that was gone. And that was the biggest wish. Like, I need a regular schedule.
Well, and you just nailed that one because routine, routine, routine. You know, the body loves and thrives in routine. So you're right. All of a sudden, someone cut the sail, and you're flapping around. You know, not knowing where to go and what to do and how to stay on track and keep yourself on track. So, yeah.
So, where do you think we are now? I mean, as far as we're in this little bit of some
Hmm.
of us are open, some of us are not,
Yeah.
we're
And
dancing.
yeah, and you know, I was really encouraged to hear you say that some people were actually in a better place than they were before the pandemic. So where are we now? I think. Well, I think there's optimism. You know that we're coming out of this, but I still, when I talk to people, they still say, like I'm some kind of judge and jury. They say, "Oh, you're going to kill me," or "You don't going to want to hear this," you know. So it's just about encouraging, encouraging, encouraging now. So we've got this little bit of optimism that we're coming out of this whole thing. So let's build on that energetically with no self-deprecation, a little bit of self-compassion or a whole lot of self-compassion. And just, you know, you don't have to all of a sudden dive into some great big huge thing, which might just add to overwhelm, but just sidestep and do a little bit better today than you did yesterday or last hour, or make a better choice, make the choice to stand up and move around, or to eat something properly. Yeah.
I'm going to, if I can, I'm going to make this a little bit personal for a second.
Okay.
But I want to do this because so many of my listeners are in this same place, have been in this same place, or
Mhm.
maybe know they will be. My mother just passed away.
I'm sorry, Deborah.
And I thank you. And I was a lucky one. She had a very full life, and she was 95 and
Right.
died without pain. So
Mhm.
lots of blessings there. But I feel like I experienced i- in the last few weeks many of the emotions you just described.
Yeah.
Like I went through that whole thing that so many people experienced, I think, during the pandemic, and that maybe personally I didn't experience that then because I was so busy working on serving my audience. I was so other focused that I was
Yeah.
actually busier and I was anchored then. And
Mhm.
now I feel a little bit like I've lost my anchor. I've lost home base. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, I think I'm. That's a huge and tragic loss, and that can take us, you know, in all kinds of direction there, as far as mental health and experiencing that grief. But distraction is always a great anchor, isn't it? Getting so focused on something that you dive so deeply into it that the old adage of, oh my god, 2.5 hours have gone by, I sat down to do something for 10 minutes.
Hmm.
So I don't know if I answered your question there, Deborah, or.
Well, I think in part, I think what I'd like to know is for listeners who
Mhm,
have been through it, maybe questioned what they went through, or are still going from it. I've heard from so many reaching out that maybe
mhm,
it was even 10 years ago that their mother passed, and or it was 3, and that many of those things are better, not as deep, and in an open wound, but that they're still there. But I think in the immediate, there's that brain fog or confusion.
mhm,
There's the slight depression, just the
mhm,
loss of, the optimism for a moment
mhm,
doesn't appear to be there. So I think
mhm,
it just maybe confirmation, Terry, that
mhm.
this is almost like what they went through was grief, maybe at the beginning of pandemic.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it from the perspective of loss, right? Grief is the
Hmm.
response to loss. And
Hmm.
what did we lose at the beginning of the pandemic? Well, basically our freedom.
Yeah.
Our freedom to move around, our freedom to socialize with people, our freedom to go to the gym and exercise. So, for sure, I absolutely think it's grief, and um, the interesting thing is the answer is still the same as to what are things we can do to improve that. And I mean, we know exercise, we know being in community, all of these things directly impact neurotransmitters that make us feel good and make us feel better. So a touch, a hug, a phone call, some exercise all creates neurotransmitters in the body that.
Talk
Oh.
to me for a minute about um, those people who are listening who are more introverts.
Mhm.
What about community for them? Still the same kind of impact, just that they need a little less of it, or what's the effect for them? Is it
Right.
different?
You know what? That's an excellent question. And that's one I'm going to learn more about, because we know that connection and community are so important, like I said, for those neurotransmitters, and which drive basically all the functions of our body. And perhaps, and like I said, I don't know the answer directly, Deborah, but perhaps they just make that connection, or need different levels of that. I mean, we you've heard of Rada. I'm sorry, I've forgotten her last name off the top of my head.
Yes.
The Daybreaker
Daybreaker.
girl, right?
Yes.
So I'm just thinking of her, right? And I'm just thinking of
Agrawal. Agrawal.
Agrawal. That's right.
Okay.
And just the importance of community, um, and how the nervous system is wired for connection. And yeah, I'm thinking that those introverts probably need that connection as well. She talks about the inner core and the outer core of community. And some people have that inner core, which is just like a few, maybe they have one best friend, or maybe they have two or three people that they confide in. And other people will have 10 or 20 or 30. So I think people connect at different levels too.
I think that's something to appreciate about yourself if you're listening. I just think when we say community, if you think, well, I'm more of an introvert, I just think you can embrace where you are and where you need that. I will volunteer this, that as much as I love groups, and so much of my community is group interaction, and there's nothing that I look forward to more than, say, this afternoon I do get to meet with our community for a 4 o'clock masterclass, but I also recharge independently. And so much of the pandemic for me was like, oh my gosh, I don't now have to give an excuse to that thing I said yes to that I don't really want to go to.
Right.
There's so less of that. It's so great.
Yeah. Allows us to be a little more selective, right? Yeah.
Right, right.
And
So good.
I was also just thinking here, during the pandemic, my husband and I sold our home, and moved to a sort of transitional place, which is a beautiful loft, but it's in a building. And I've never lived in like an apartment building before in my life. And I found it really amazing, even though I don't really know these people deeply. It's just so refreshing and so human and so connecting to be able to say hi to 5 people on the way to my car in the morning, or, to be able to open the door for somebody, or, like, it's just, there's not like a deep, huge connection there with a great big group of people. But I just found that having those sort of random smiles and connections through the day was really a positive influence on me.
So nice. So
Yeah.
nice.
Mhm.
And I think I would love to talk about here, like on a daily basis, or if they're daily and weekly and monthly kind of practices that there are. What kind of things, literally, like what could be packed in our kitchen, refrigerator, cupboard, things that we can do for healthy brain?
Oh, absolutely. Um, well, the first thing, uh, okay, I was going to start with a what not to do, but let's start with what to do. I mean, I think broccoli. Broccoli has that reputation as the ultimate brain food, right? So that's definitely something you can load up on. Fatty fish like salmon, like mackerel. Make sure that there's fish is included in the diet. Turmeric is a great herb that is known to be anti-inflammatory in the brain. So it's a herb that I cook with regularly because it doesn't, a spice, I guess you could call it. It doesn't add a whole lot of flavor, but it adds a little bit of color and a little bit of character. the things we really want to stay away from are those simple carbs, right? Anything that jacks the inflammation up in the gut jacks the inflammation up in the brain, because of course the gut and the brain are directly connected by the vagus nerve. So any shenanigans that go in your mouth and end up in your tummy also play themselves out in the brain, which is super important to remember, right?
It might be good here to talk about alcohol.
I was just thinking about alcohol when you said that. That is so funny because I mean, it's especially in the 50 plus group because, we've got this sort of marketing image that's been programmed into our brains of I get to this age and stage and I deserve a glass of wine after work and I deserve a glass of wine on the dock on the weekend. And, that's just sort of my rite of passage. I've really made it if I have that glass of wine. Well, guess what we end up doing with that glass of wine is we self-medicate. And it's just another inflammatory confounding factor. And of course, it jacks the blood sugar up, right? So sadly, alcohol consumption has skyrocketed through the pandemic
Yes.
as people turn to comfort stuff, right?
Yes.
So yeah,
Okay.
nothing good about the brain and alcohol.
Or the belly and alcohol.
Or the belly and alcohol. And remember, the belly and the brain are one, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not unrelated. Love it. Okay, so question. So you mentioned a couple of things, and that broccoli honestly wouldn't have been the first thing. The first thing that comes to my mind, and so is this good marketing or is this true? Blueberries.
For the brain?
Yeah.
Well, I can think of all kinds of reasons blueberries are good for the brain. They're potent antioxidants. They're prebiotic foods, which means they're, making the gut happy. And remember, when the gut's happy, the brain's happy. So I can think of lots of good reasons why blueberries would be good brain food.
How about beets? Beet juice.
Love it, especially if it's fermented.
Ah, okay.
Mm.
All right. And you mentioned, of course, fatty fishes. What about supplements, an omega-3 supplement?
You know what? If you're not getting enough, and it's hard, isn't it, now to get enough fish because there's so much controversy
Yes.
over fish, even wild fish. But for sure, I mean, I think here's three basics that I think everybody should supplement. Unfortunately, we live in a chronic world, Deborah, so we are going to have to do some supplementation if we want to totally stay on the good side of everything. And one of those in my mind is definitely a fish oil. One of those is a probiotic, good multi-strain probiotic, and the other one is vitamin D. So yes, fish oil is definitely in there.
Don't want to back you into the corner, but I know that I will get asked this. Do you have a probiotic that you favor, a brand or a dose per?
You know what? The best thing about probiotics right now is we don't know what we don't know. So I completely experiment with probiotics just based on experience and what's going on for a person. I like to switch things up a lot. So if you do one brand or one type of probiotic for 3 months, then switch it up and do another one. If you're, I encourage people to experiment with dosage. So I think a good 50 or 60 billion CFUs is a good daily dose. But if you've got tummy problems, then take more and see what your body says. So that's my long, evasive answer to do I have a brand that I do? No, I actually don't. So
Okay.
I like to mix it up.
Yep, well done. And I've heard that, and actually, that's been what I've echoed from other functional docs. So I appreciate you kind of putting a confirmation stamp on that. So good. Okay, Teri. So while I've got you here, what question should I ask you that I haven't yet?
Oh, Deborah, you've asked so many great questions. I guess one thing that I want people to understand is that, proactive prevention is always better than trying to backpedal after a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or Parkinson's um, or multiple sclerosis or anything. And I really, really do worry because we're in a culture that does wait until that stupid diagnosis, right? But here's what I worry the most about with this pandemic and its impact on the brain through all the things we've talked about is, you know, when you cut down a tree and the rings of the tree, you can say, that was the drought of 2005. And oh, look, that was the forest fire of 1996. And so its environment plays itself out in the rings of that tree. And I wonder what the ring is that's going to be left on our health from this pandemic. So I guess the summary for me is proactive prevention. So, managing insulin resistance, staying active, staying connected, and staying off the alcohol, all great ways to just stay happy and healthy and cognitively sound.
Love it. Love the basic advice. And of course, love that you're screaming exercise, exercise, exercise.
Mm-hmm.
So I did think of one question. So, what about so called brain exercises? Little memory games
Oh,
or, yeah, talk about
okay.
that.
So how long do we have? Because that's something I could talk about for hours. So one of, like I said, I could take a sabbatical for like 5 years and do nothing but study neuroplasticity, because what you're talking about is neuroplasticity, and that's one of the great things about the brain is that through focused repetitive exercise that we can actually change the infrastructure of the brain. And so this is like super neuroplasticity applies to whether you're learning a new language or whether you're doing a puzzle or whether you're trying to reroute brain signals that have been damaged in something like Parkinson's or MS. So absolutely, the more of those kind of exercises that we can do for the brain, the better. Brush your hair with the other hand. We're creatures of a habit, so we do the same thing all the time, the same thing the same way all the time. So do it differently. Instead of reaching left, reach right. Instead of stepping forward with one foot, step forward with the other foot. All of that stuff is great for the brain.
Love it. Okay. Great way to end. So good. I see a challenge coming up for you, Flipping 50 members. So we'll be working on that. All right. Teri, it's been so great to have you. Thank you again.
Well, it's been great to be here, Deborah. Thank you for having me.
And now, listeners, it's your turn. So if there's a question that you wish I would have asked Teri that I missed, you can leave that below the show notes today at flipping50.com/brain health. And what are you waiting for? Let's start flipping 50 today.